Who the hell are you? Lieutenant Commander Ryan Mitchell's voice cracked as he spoke those words, and let me tell you, this was a man who had led Navy SEALs through some of the most dangerous operations on the planet without so much as a tremor in his vocal cords. But right now, standing in a bullet-riddled building in the middle of hostile Afghan territory, watching the woman he had dismissed as just the medic drop 3 insurgents with 3 perfectly placed shots. In under 2 seconds, his voice betrayed something he had not felt in 15 years of combat. Genuine shock. The rifle in her hands was not even supposed to be there. She was not supposed to be firing it. She was supposed to be in the corner treating the wounded, staying out of the way while the real operators handled business. That was the deal. That was her role. Medical personnel only, but Victoria Ashford did not answer his question. She was already moving to a new position, her eyes scanning for the next threat, her body flowing with a fluidity that did not belong to someone who just carried the bandages. And as Mitchell watched her disappear behind a crumbling wall weapon raised, he realized something terrifying. He had brought a wolf onto the mission, and for 6 hours he had mistaken her for a sheep. 6 hours earlier, nobody on that helicopter had even bothered to learn her name. The Sich-47 Chinook descended into the Afghan valley at 0200 hours, its twin rotors beating against the thin mountain air with that distinctive thump-thump-thump that every soldier learns to recognize in their bones. Inside the cargo bay, 8 Navy SEALs sat with their weapons between their knees, faces painted in streaks of black and green eyes, already focused on the mission ahead. And at the far end of the cabin, almost invisible in the red glow of the interior lights, sat Victoria Ashford. If you had asked any of the men on that helicopter to describe her, they would have struggled. She was the kind of woman who seemed to occupy negative space, who somehow made herself smaller than she actually was. Her blonde hair was scraped back into a severe bun so tight it looked painful. She wore reading glasses that she did not actually need, a little trick she had learned years ago to make herself appear more bookish, less threatening. Her shoulders were perpetually hunched forward, as if she were apologizing for taking up room in the world. You ever been this far north? Nurse Petty Officer Kyle Bennett called out over the rotor noise, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He was 27, built like a Greek statue, and possessed that particular brand of arrogance that comes from being very good at a very dangerous job. Victoria looked up slowly, her expression blank behind those unnecessary glasses. 3 times before you, she replied, her voice barely audible over the engines. Bennett grinned and nudged the man next to him. First rotation for me up here, but I am a shooter. You just carry the bandages, right? A few chuckles rippled through the team. Victoria said nothing. Her eyes simply returned to the darkness beyond the open ramp, watching the mountains pass beneath them like the spines of sleeping giants. She had learned long ago that certain battles were not worth fighting. Not with words, anyway. The mission briefing had been straightforward, almost boring in its simplicity. Extract a high-value intelligence asset from a compound 15 kilometers into hostile territory. 8 hours in, 8 hours out. Minimal contact expected. Victoria had heard assessments like that before, usually right before everything went catastrophically wrong. She had packed extra gauze. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross was not a man who missed details. In 3 combat deployments and 15 years of service, he had worked with 7 different corpsmen and medics. Some were competent, a few were exceptional. Most were exactly what you would expect medical professionals doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. But something about Victoria Ashford was different, and it was bothering him. He watched her from across the cabin as the helicopter banked through a narrow pass, and he noticed things that the others missed. The way she had secured her gear, for instance. Every pouch, every strap, every piece of equipment was positioned with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times, someone who knew exactly where their hands would need to go in the dark. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the cabin, tracking the positions of every person, every weapon, every potential threat. It was not the passive observation of a nervous medic on her first mission. It was active assessment, the kind of situational awareness that took years to develop and even longer to perfect. And then there was the knife. Strapped to her right thigh, almost hidden by the bulk of her medical bag, was a blade with a 4-inch edge. It was not standard medical equipment. It was not even close to standard medical equipment. And the way it was positioned, angled for a quick cross draw with her left hand, spoke to muscle memory that had nothing to do with bandages and sutures. When the helicopter hit a pocket of turbulence and lurched violently to the side, Cross watched every other person in the cabin grab for support. Victoria did not move. Her core stayed rock solid, her center of gravity automatically adjusting to the motion. It was the kind of stability that came from thousands of hours of training from learning to operate in chaos. Cross filed all of this away in the back of his mind. He did not say anything to Mitchell. He did not have enough evidence to make an accusation, and besides, what would he even accuse her of being too competent? But as the crew chief announced 2 minutes to landing, Cross made a mental note to watch the medic very carefully. Medical personnel did not move like that. The Chinook flared hard over the landing zone, and the team poured out into the Afghan night like shadows given form. Victoria was fifth off the ramp. She landed in a crouch, her feet barely making a sound on the rocky ground, and she was immediately scanning for threats while the others established a perimeter around the helicopter. The bird lifted away. Seconds later, the rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and debris, and then silence rushed in to fill the space its engines had occupied. The kind of silence that only exists in places where people die. Mitchell used hand signals to organize the formation, and they began moving through the rocky terrain toward their target compound, still 15 kilometers away. Victoria was positioned in the middle of the column, surrounded by shooters theoretically protected from any threat that might emerge from the darkness. She matched their pace exactly, not lagging behind like a liability, not crowding the man ahead of her like an amateur. When they went prone to avoid the headlights of a distant vehicle on a mountain road, she was flat on the ground before the hand signal finished traveling down the line. When they crossed a dry stream bed, her footfalls made no more sound than the SEALs did. After 2 hours of movement, Petty Officer Ryan Kowalski whispered to Bennett during a security halt, his voice barely louder than a breath. "She is quiet. She is scared." Bennett replied with a dismissive shrug. But Victoria was not scared. She was counting paces the way she had been taught at ranger school. Counting terrain features the way she had done on 100 night patrols. Counting the number of compounds they passed, marking them on the map she was building in her mind. She was noting fields of fire, identifying cover positions, memorizing choke points. Old habits. Muscle memory. Things she was not supposed to be doing anymore according to the terms of her reassignment. But habits that kept you alive did not die easily. They just went dormant, waiting for the moment when they would be needed again. At 0340 hours, they reached the Overwatch position. It was a cluster of boulders on a hillside with clear lines of sight to the target compound 800 meters below. Mitchell set security-assigned sectors of responsibility and established the command post behind the largest rock, while the team settled in to wait. Victoria unpacked her medical supplies and organized them with surgical precision. Hemorrhage control closest to her dominant hand, because bleeding was the thing most likely to kill someone fast. Airway management next, then fluids and medications in descending order of urgency. It was a ritual she had performed hundreds of times, and her hands moved through it without conscious thought. Coffee Cross offered, appearing beside her with a battered thermos. "Thank you, Chief." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the eastern horizon where dawn would eventually break. The stars above them were brilliant and cold, undimmed by any light pollution, and the mountains around them were ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of men with guns. "You are calm," Cross observed quietly. "Most medical personnel get jumpy on their first direct action mission." Victoria took a careful sip of the coffee. It was bitter and burnt and exactly what she needed. "This is not my first," she replied. Cross waited for elaboration. None came. Victoria handed back the thermos and returned to her supplies, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had performed these tasks under fire in the dark while people were shooting at her. Cross noticed her fingers pause over a particular pouch on her vest, saw her check its contents, then secure it differently than before. It was a small thing, but in his experience, small things mattered. Dawn arrived without fanfare, a gradual graying of the sky that turned the landscape from black to charcoal to brown. The target compound below began to stir. Children emerged to tend goats. Women carried water from a central well. 2 guards walked lazy patrols around the perimeter. Their weapons slung carelessly across their backs, their attention focused more on their conversation than on any potential threat. The SEALs observed all of this through their scopes, noting the obvious targets, guard positions, weapon caches, entry points, lines of fire, standard reconnaissance. Victoria observed different things. She noticed that the women moved in patterns that avoided certain areas skirting around the eastern courtyard, even when it would have been faster to walk through it. She saw how the children stayed away from a particular section of wall, giving it a wide berth as if they had been warned. So, she noted the way dust had settled unevenly on the rooftops, suggesting recent foot traffic, in places that should have been empty. These details told stories, and she had learned to read them in places whose names she tried not to remember. Around 1100 hours, a battered pickup truck entered the compound. 4 men dismounted, 2 of them carrying AK-47s openly. They spoke with the guards, gestured animatedly toward the northern building, then departed. After they left, the guards seemed more alert, their lazy patrols becoming tighter and more focused. Timeline just moved, Mitchell said quietly. We go at 1600 hours. Full daylight, maximum confusion. We will use their afternoon prayer routine for cover. Victoria checked her medical supplies one more time. The feeling in her gut told her that minimal contact expected was about to become the understatement of the decade. She was right. The 90 minutes before the assault stretched like hours. Victoria went through her mental checklist one more time, reviewing tourniquet placement, chest seal procedures, the steps for treating tension pneumothorax. Medical knowledge, clean and clinical, the kind of information that saved lives without taking them. But underneath that mental recitation, another current ran parallel. Sight pictures, breathing control, trigger discipline, immediate action drills for weapon malfunctions. The tactical knowledge she was not supposed to have anymore, according to the review board that had ended her career as an operator 2 years ago. She pushed those thoughts down, hard. That was not who she was anymore. The orders had been clear. Bennett approached her during the final equipment check, his breaching charges laid out on the ground for inspection. Hey, nurse, help me verify these detonator connections. Victoria knelt beside him, her hands moving over the charges with expert precision. She checked the wiring, tested the resistance, verified the placement of the blasting caps. Everything was textbook. Bennett watched her with narrowed eyes. You ever fire a weapon, nurse? I have qualified with several, Victoria replied without looking up. It was true, also insufficient. Qualified did not capture the thousands of rounds she had put downrange over the years. It did not describe the muscle memory that could strip and reassemble an M4 carbine in 18 seconds flat. It did not convey the small matter of her previous role before the incident, before the review board, before her carefully negotiated reassignment to medical services. Good, Bennett said, standing up and dusting off his knees. Stay behind us and you will be fine. Victoria said nothing. She had learned that words were wasted on men who had already made up their minds about who she was. At 1600 hours precisely, the call to prayer echoed from a distant mosque floating across the valley like a mournful song. In the compound below, the guards set down their weapons and faced Mecca, their attention turned away from the hillside, where 8 Navy SEALs were beginning their final approach. It was the moment of maximum vulnerability, and Mitchell had chosen it perfectly. The team moved with textbook precision, flowing down the hillside in a coordinated rush that covered the 800 meters in under 10 minutes. They stacked up outside the compound's outer wall, breaching charges already in place, weapons ready. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion shattered the afternoon stillness, blowing the outer gate inward in a shower of mud brick and dust. The SEALs poured through the gap before the echo had finished rolling across the valley, their weapons up and searching for targets. The initial resistance was minimal. 2 guards attempted to retrieve their weapons and died before their fingers touched the metal. A third appeared in a doorway, his rifle half raised, and a 3-round burst from Rodriguez dropped him before he could squeeze off a shot. Cole's element reached the northern building and stacked up outside the reinforced door. A second charge was placed, and another explosion sent the door flying inward. Ground floor clear, Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. Cross led his team up a narrow staircase toward the second floor, where intelligence suggested their target was being held. Victoria moved to the base of the stairs and established her casualty collection point, exactly where Mitchell had designated. Everything was going according to plan. The compound was secured in under 90 seconds. Resistance had been minimal, just as intelligence had predicted. And then Victoria saw the figures appearing on the rooftops. The first burst of automatic weapons fire raked the courtyard from the eastern wall, and the carefully planned operation disintegrated in a matter of seconds. Contact rear Harrison shouted, pivoting to engage the new threat. He did not get the chance. A round caught him in the leg before he completed the turn, and he went down hard, his rifle clattering away across the packed earth. A second round punched through his shoulder as Mitchell dragged him toward the cover of the northern building. More guns opened up from the south, then from the west. The compound had become a kill zone, with fire pouring in from 3 different directions simultaneously. This was not a holding facility. This was a trap. All elements, we are compromised. Mitchell's voice cut through the radio chaos. Execute E and E protocol. But there was no escape and evasion. The compound's single exit, the gate they had breached minutes earlier, was now a wall of lead. Whoever had planned this ambush had studied American tactics and prepared accordingly. Victoria moved without thinking. She grabbed Harrison by the drag handle on his plate carrier and hauled him into the building, while Mitchell laid down suppressive fire. The wounded SEAL was screaming, his leg wound catastrophic blood pumping out in rhythmic spurts that told Victoria everything she needed to know about femoral artery involvement. She had the tourniquet around his thigh in under 5 seconds, cinched high and tight. Her hands performing the steps that her mind no longer needed to consciously direct. Upstairs, gunfire erupted. Multiple weapons close quarters, the distinctive crack of American rifles mixed with the deeper bark of AK-47s. Cross's voice crackled over the radio, breathless and tight. Multiple hostiles on second floor. Package is not here. Repeat. This is a dry hole. Cole appeared at the top of the stairs, half carrying Walsh, whose face was a mask of blood from a wound somewhere above his hairline. Victoria pulled them both down to the ground floor and began assessing injuries while the building shook from the impacts of rocket-propelled grenades. The situation had gone from bad to catastrophic in under a minute. The team collapsed inward, abandoning the courtyard to enemy fire and consolidating in the northern building. They dragged their wounded with them, barricaded the windows with whatever furniture they could find, and prepared for a siege they all knew they could not win. Victoria worked in the dim interior, moving between patients with the efficiency of someone who had done this far too many times before. Harrison's bleeding was controlled, but he had lost too much blood. His skin was pale, his pulse was rapid and thready, and his eyes had that glazed look that came from shock setting in. He needed a hospital. He needed blood transfusions and surgical intervention and a dozen other things that Victoria could not provide in a besieged building in the middle of hostile territory. Walsh was ambulatory despite the head wound, which looked worse than it was. Scalp lacerations bled dramatically, but were rarely life-threatening. She cleaned it and bandaged it and moved on. Thompson had taken shrapnel in his arm, fragments of stone and metal embedded in the muscle. Painful, but functional. Bennett had 2 fingers broken from an impact with a door frame. During the retreat, his shooting hand compromised, but not useless. And Rodriguez was dead. She had found him in the corner of the building, slumped against the wall, with a hole in his chest and his eyes staring at nothing. He had taken a round during the initial assault and bled out before anyone could reach him. His rifle lay next to his body, fully loaded, unfired. Victoria looked at it for a long moment, then forced herself to look away. "Count off," Mitchell ordered. "Ammunition status." The responses came in grim sequence, each one tightening the knot in Victoria's stomach. Cross had 3 magazines. Cole had 2. Rodriguez's ammunition was distributed among the survivors, but it was not enough. Bennett had 4 magazines, but his broken fingers made reloading difficult. Thompson could still shoot despite his arm wound, but his accuracy was compromised. Victoria said nothing when the count reached her. She carried no rifle. Those were her orders. Outside, the enemy fire shifted from sustained suppression to calculated harassment. They were not trying to storm the building anymore. They were patient now, content to wait to let the trapped Americans exhaust their ammunition and their hope. "They are calling for reinforcements." Cross assessed, his voice flat and professional. "They will hit us hard after dark with everything they can gather." Mitchell checked his watch. 3 hours until sunset. 3 hours to prepare for a final stand. 3 hours until they all died. Victoria finished bandaging Thompson's arm and moved to check Harrison's vitals one more time. The tourniquet was doing its job, but the SEAL's condition was deteriorating. His blood pressure was dropping. His breathing was becoming shallow, and his responses were sluggish. He was bleeding internally somewhere she could not reach with bandages and pressure. "Sorry, Doc," Harrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the sporadic gunfire outside. "Guess I messed up your quiet day." "Save your strength," Victoria replied, adjusting his IV line. "You scared?" She met his eyes. They were glassy with pain and blood loss, but there was still a spark of awareness in them, a need to connect with another human being in what might be his final hours. "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "I am scared." It was true, but not in the way he imagined. She was scared of what would happen when the ammunition ran out. She was scared of what orders she would follow or ignore when the enemy finally breached their barricades and came through those windows with knives and rage. She was scared of the person she had been, The person she had promised never to be again. The person who was screaming inside her skull, right now demanding to be let out. At 17:20 hours, Cross came down from a reconnaissance of the upper floor. His face was grim. "North wall is compromised," he reported, keeping his voice low. "They are placing charges. When they blow it, they will have a straight shot into this room." Mitchell absorbed this information with the calm of a man who had accepted his own death. How long minutes? Victoria looked at Rodriguez's body in the corner. At the rifle lying next to it, still loaded, still unfired. At the weapon that could change everything if she just reached out and picked it up. She should not. The orders were clear. Medical personnel only, no combat operations, no weapons except in immediate self-defense. But what was this if not immediate self-defense? What was watching 8 men die when she had the skills to save them? The wall exploded inward. Mud, brick, and dust filled the air, turning the interior of the building into a choking brown fog. Through the breach, Victoria could see shapes moving, her voices, shouting in a language she recognized but did not speak. And then the first insurgent came through the hole, his rifle rising, his finger tightening on the trigger. Victoria Ashford made a choice. Her hand closed around the grip of Rodriguez's rifle. The weight was familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend she'd promised never to see again. Her fingers found the magazine release, checked the chamber, flipped the safety to fire. All in less than 2 seconds. "Nurse, put it down," Cross shouted from his position by the window. She did not put it down. The insurgent's rifle was almost level, now his muzzle swinging toward Mitchell, who was still turning too slow too late. Victoria's weapon came up, smooth, fast, natural. Sight picture acquired, breathing controlled, trigger press gradual and perfect. The shot took him in the upper chest. He fell backward through the breach he had just entered, dead before he hit the ground. The room went silent. Every SEAL in that building turned to stare at the medic, at the woman they had dismissed and ignored and mocked for 6 hours. Not at the fact that she had fired, but at how she had fired. The stance. The economy of movement. The single shot placed exactly where it needed to go. "Who the hell are you?" Mitchell whispered. Victoria did not answer. 2 more fighters were coming through the breach. She engaged them both. 2 shots each. Center mass. They dropped. And in that moment, standing in the dust and the chaos with a rifle in her hands and blood on her boots, Victoria Ashford stopped being invisible. The wolf was awake. Time seemed to slow down in that moment the way it always did when Victoria entered what her instructors at Ranger School had called the zone. The dust from the breach hung suspended in the air like a frozen curtain. The shouts of the insurgents outside became distant and muffled, as if she were hearing them through water. Her heartbeat, which should have been racing, settled into a steady rhythm that she could feel in her fingertips, in the pad of her trigger finger, in the space between one breath and the next. 2 years. 2 years of suppressing this part of herself, of pretending it did not exist, of following orders that told her to be small and quiet and invisible. 2 years of watching other people do the job she had been born to do, while she stood on the sidelines with bandages and good intentions. All of that ended the moment her hand closed around Rodriguez's rifle. The weapon felt like coming home. The grip texture against her palm, the weight distribution slightly forward due to the full magazine, the familiar click of the safety disengaging under her thumb. She had fired tens of thousands of rounds through weapons exactly like this one had learned to strip and reassemble them. Blindfolded, had qualified expert on every range the Army had to offer. And now, standing in a bullet-riddled building in Afghanistan with 8 lives depending on her, all of that training came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam. Cross was still shouting at her to put the weapon down, but his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. She registered it, filed it away as irrelevant, and focused on the breach where more shapes were moving through the dust cloud. 2 more insurgents came through the hole in the wall, their rifles already up their fingers on their triggers. They were expecting to find wounded Americans easy targets, men who had already given up hope. They found Victoria instead. Her rifle came up in one smooth motion. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The first shot took the lead insurgent in the chest before he had finished stepping through the breach. The second shot, fired less than a second later, dropped his companion before the man could process what was happening. 4 shots. 4 bodies. Less than 5 seconds. The room fell absolutely silent except for the ringing in everyone's ears. 8 Navy SEALs, some of the most elite warriors on the planet, stared at the blonde woman in medical scrubs. who had just killed 4 men with the casual efficiency of someone swatting flies. "Who the hell are you?" Mitchell asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria did not answer. She was already moving to a new position, her eyes scanning for the next threat, her body flowing through the debris with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning to dance in chaos. 3 o'clock window, she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. Movement on the compound wall. Cross shifted to cover the angle before his conscious mind caught up with the fact that he was taking tactical direction from their medic. His body simply responded to the authority in her voice, the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. The enemy attack already committed could not easily reverse course. More fighters poured through the breach, driven forward by their commanders and their own momentum, expecting to overwhelm the trapped Americans through sheer numbers. They had no idea what they were walking into. Victoria met them with precision fire that turned the breach into a killing ground. She was not spraying bullets the way an amateur would, was not panic shooting in the general direction of the enemy. Every trigger pull was deliberate, every shot placed exactly where it needed to go. Center, mass, center, mass, center, mass. The fundamentals she had learned at Ranger School, the skills she had honed through 3 combat deployments, all of it came back as naturally as breathing. She dropped to one knee beside Bennett, who was still trying to shoot. Despite his broken fingers, his face twisted in pain and frustration. "Can you brace your rifle against that debris?" she asked, gesturing to a pile of rubble near his position. He nodded, confused but willing. "Do it. Cover the doorway. Slow and steady controlled pairs. Make them think twice about coming through." Bennett did exactly as she instructed, because in that moment, Victoria's voice carried the absolute authority of someone who belonged in this chaos, someone who understood its rhythms and rules better than he did. His shots became more accurate, more deliberate, and the doorway he was covering became impassable. Rodriguez appeared from the collapsed section of the 2nd floor, dusty and bleeding from a dozen small cuts, but still mobile. Victoria pointed him toward Cole's position without breaking her own rhythm of fire. "Reinforce the northeast corner. They're going to try flanking us through the courtyard." He went without question. She was not thinking anymore, was not analyzing or planning or second-guessing. She was simply executing, letting years of training override the orders, override the promises, override everything except the immediate necessity of keeping her people alive. Reloading, she called out, dropping the empty magazine and seating a fresh one in less than 2 seconds. The motion was so smooth, so practiced, that it looked like a magic trick. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the breach and impacted against the far wall. The explosion was devastating in the confined space, showering everyone with fragments of stone and mud brick. Victoria felt something hot slice across her left shoulder, a shard of debris opening a 6-inch gash through her uniform and into the muscle beneath. She ignored it completely. Her eyes were already acquiring the next target, a fighter who had used the RPG explosion as cover to advance through the breach. 2 rounds center mass. He dropped. She shifted to the next threat, and the next, and the next. The enemy fire began to slacken. They had expected a massacre, these insurgents. They had expected to find broken men huddling in corners waiting to die. Instead, they were taking casualties at a rate that made no tactical sense. Their assault disrupted by accurate fire from positions they could not identify, because they were looking for shooters, for the big men with the big rifles who matched their mental image of American soldiers. They were not looking for the small blonde woman who moved like smoke through the debris, appearing in one position, just long enough to kill, then vanishing before they could return fire. Victoria made a tactical assessment in the space between heartbeats, the way she had been trained to do. The enemy was committed to the assault, but they were disorganized. They had numbers, probably 20 to 25 fighters, but they lacked cohesive coordination. They owned the high ground around the compound, but they were funneling through limited access points that turned their numerical advantage into a liability. "Chief Cross," she called out. "Yeah. Can you reach the northeast window without exposing yourself to the breach?" Cross looked at the angle, calculated the distance. "Maybe. It will be tight. Do it. There is a commander position on the compound wall directing their fire. Take it out and their coordination falls apart." Cross moved without questioning the order because the tactical assessment was correct and he knew it. Thompson followed him, providing covering fire as they worked their way to the new position. Together they engaged the enemy command element, and the coordinated assault began to fracture into chaos. Mitchell watched all of this while returning fire from his own position, his mind trying to reconcile the woman he had brought on this mission with the operator who was currently directing his team's defense. Questions could wait. Explanations could wait. Right now, they were staying alive, and that was the only thing that mattered. Victoria moved through the building with the confidence of someone reading a language they had once spoken fluently. She identified firing positions and designated sectors. She redistributed ammunition from those who could no longer shoot effectively to those who could. She checked wounds and adjusted bandages without ever losing awareness of the tactical situation around her. Her medical training merged with her combat training, creating a hybrid skill set that made her simultaneously lethal and healing. She would drop an enemy fighter with a precisely placed shot, then immediately move to check on Harrison's vitals, then return to her rifle to engage the next threat. "Pierce, can you move?" she asked the breacher who was propped against a wall, with his arms wrapped around his ribs. "Ribs are smashed," he groaned. "Cannot breathe deep." Victoria checked his eyes, noted his color, listened to his breathing. The slight wheeze and diminished breath sounds on one side told her everything she needed to know. "Pneumothorax," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Not tension, not yet, but we need to watch it. You can still shoot if you stay sitting. Give me your rifle." She positioned him in a corner where he could cover 2 approaches without having to turn his damaged torso, then retrieved his weapon and distributed his remaining magazines. "You are hit," Cross noted as she passed him, gesturing to the blood soaking through her left sleeve. Victoria glanced at the wound as if noticing it for the first time. Later, she said, and returned to the main breach where enemy fire had renewed after a brief lull. They were regrouping out there, preparing for another push. She could hear them shouting to each other, could see shadows moving behind the dust clouds that still hung in the air. She counted muzzle flashes, estimated numbers, calculated time. "Sir," she called to Mitchell, "they are going to rush us in approximately 90 seconds. They will use the dust cloud from their next RPG as cover for the approach." Mitchell looked at her with an expression that mixed respect with disbelief. "How do you know?" "Because that is what I would do." The lull in fighting gave Mitchell the opportunity he needed to address the elephant in the room. "Cross, hold the breach. Thompson, watch our 6. Everyone else, maintain your positions." He moved to where Victoria was checking her rifle, his voice low but intense. "I need to know who I am working with here." Victoria did not look up from her weapon inspection. "You know who I am, sir. I am your medic. Medics do not shoot like that. Medics do not move like that. Medics do not give tactical commands that my most experienced operators follow without question." Mitchell grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Who are you really?" Victoria was silent for a long moment. Outside, she could hear the enemy fighters repositioning, could hear the distinctive clang of an RPG being loaded into its launcher. They had maybe 60 seconds before the next assault. "Victoria Elizabeth Ashford," she said finally. "Former Staff Sergeant 75th Ranger Regiment 3rd Battalion. Ranger School Graduate Sniper School Qualified Military Freefall. Certified Combat Lifesaver. 3 deployments before my reassignment, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan." The SEALs within earshot processed this information in stunned silence. A Ranger. Not just any Ranger, but someone with qualifications that rivaled or exceeded their own in certain specialized areas. Why, Cross asked from his position by the breach. "Why were you reassigned?" Victoria's jaw tightened. There was a mission. Hostage rescue. The rules of engagement were strict. No offensive action, we could only shoot if directly engaged. The hostages were being executed while we watched one by one, and command would not authorize us to intervene. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "I made a decision. I eliminated the threat. 3 tangos, 3 shots, saved 7 lives." Her voice hardened. "Violated a direct order." "That sounds like a medal, not a punishment," Thompson said. "It was both," Victoria replied. "Silver Star for valor, and a one-way ticket out of operational roles." The review board decided I was too aggressive, too willing to interpret ROE creatively. They said I lacked the judgment for operational duty. "That is garbage," Bennett muttered, and Victoria noticed that the mockery had completely disappeared from his voice. "That is politics. So they gave me a choice: leave service entirely or accept reassignment to Medical Corps. I chose to stay. Figured I could still save lives just with bandages instead of bullets." She looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the weapon she had promised herself she would never pick up again. Until today, when it became clear that following those orders would get 8 good men killed. Mitchell nodded slowly, processing everything she had told him. And now I face whatever consequences come. Court-martial, discharge, prison, whatever they decide. Victoria met his eyes steadily. But I will not apologize for what I did, and I will not stop until we get out of here. These men are my responsibility. I do not care what any review board says. The RPG streaked through the breach before anyone could respond, and the next assault began. Victoria transitioned seamlessly between shooter and healer as the battle raged around her. The enemy attacked with smoke grenades, this time trying to obscure their approach through the breach. Victoria countered by positioning the team to cover likely avenues of approach, rather than visible targets, forcing the insurgents to move through predetermined kill zones regardless of their concealment. When Harrison's condition suddenly deteriorated, his blood pressure crashing and his breathing becoming dangerously shallow, she was engaging targets from behind a pile of rubble. Cross shouted for medical assistance, and Victoria dropped her magazine, cleared her weapon, and was at Harrison's side in less than 5 seconds. Her hands, steady on the trigger moments before, were equally steady as she placed a new IV line, administered fluids, and adjusted the tourniquet that had been in place for too long. "Stay with me, Harrison," she murmured, checking his pulse and monitoring his level of consciousness. "You are not dying in this building. I will not allow it." "You are pretty good with that rifle," Doc Harrison whispered, his voice barely audible. "Shut up and breathe." She stabilized him as much as possible with her limited supplies, then returned to her weapon. The duality felt natural, felt right, felt like the person she had always been meant to be before regulations and review boards had tried to split her in half. Cole's breathing had worsened while she was treating Harrison. She could hear the wheeze from across the room, could see the way he was struggling to fill his lungs. "His pneumothorax is progressing," she announced, moving to his position. "I need to decompress his chest or we are going to lose him." "Here," Mitchell asked, incredulous. "Now, no choice, sir." She performed the procedure in the dim light of the besieged building, enemy fire cracking overhead and dust raining down from the ceiling with every impact. Her hands were certain, despite the circumstances, years of training guiding the needle between his ribs to release the trapped air. The relief was immediate. Cole gasped as his lung reinflated, his color improving within seconds. "Better?" Victoria asked. "Yeah," Cole breathed. "Thanks, Doc." "You are welcome. Now get back on that rifle. We need every shooter we have got." The enemy probed their defenses twice more over the next hour, each time trying a different approach, each time meeting a coordinated response that cost them fighters. Victoria was reading them now, anticipating their moves before they made them, positioning the team to counter each thrust before it developed. She was playing chess while they played checkers, always 2 moves ahead, always seeing the pattern before it fully formed. During a brief lull, she moved to the upper floor to assess their position from a higher vantage point. The destruction was extensive holes blown through walls that provided lines of sight, but also made them vulnerable. She counted enemy positions, marked their locations, mentally estimated their remaining strength. 15 fighters visible, probably another 5 to 8 in reserve. Against 4 fully combat-effective SEALs, 2 limited by wounds and 2 unable to fight at all. The math was still bad, but it was better than it had been 3 hours ago. She descended and found Mitchell reloading magazines from the loose ammunition scattered across the floor. "Report," he said without looking up. Victoria gave him a concise, tactical summary: enemy strength disposition, probable courses of action. She spoke the language of operations orders, of military decision-making, of someone who had attended the same schools and courses as the men around her. "They are losing their nerve," she concluded. "They have taken more casualties than they expected, and their leadership element is dead. If we can survive until dawn, we might have options." "What kind of options?" "Breakout. Hit them during their lowest alert period, punch through their weakest sector, and run until we reach ground we can defend." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. This woman who had transformed from invisible medic to tactical commander in the space of a single afternoon. "You really think we can make it?" "I think we have a better chance out there than we do in here, sir. Harrison will not survive another 12 hours without surgery. Cole's condition is stabilizing, but he needs proper medical care. If we stay, we die. If we move, we might live." The enemy launched their next assault at 1847 hours, just as the light was beginning to fail. Victoria had predicted it would come during the transition between day and night, when shadows made targeting difficult, and the Americans' advantage in night vision equipment had not yet become decisive. She had positioned the team accordingly. "They are coming," she announced, watching the movements in the compound through a hole in the wall. Smoke first, then infantry. They will rush the breach and try to overwhelm us with numbers. Mitchell relayed her assessment to the team. Everyone hold fire on my command. Let them commit to the breach. Let them think we are finished. Then we light them up from the flanks. It was a good plan, made better by Victoria's read of the enemy's intentions. The RPG came first, streaking through the fading light to impact against the north wall and fill the building with smoke and dust. Then the fighters poured through dark shapes in the murky air rifles, blazing voices, screaming confident in their victory. They found not scattered resistance, but a coordinated ambush. The SEAL team's fire was devastating at close range, every weapon engaging from carefully selected positions that created interlocking fields of fire. The breach became a fatal funnel, and the insurgents who had rushed through it never stood a chance. Victoria took down 4 of them herself, methodical shots that dropped one fighter after another before they could find cover. Ceasefire, she called out when the last body fell. Conserve ammunition. In the relative quiet that followed, she heard something that made her smile grimly. Shouting from outside the compound. Voices raised in argument. The sound of men who had just watched their friends die and were questioning whether this fight was worth continuing. They did not expect this, Victoria said. They are reconsidering the cost. Will they break off? Rodriguez asked hopefully. No, but they will be more cautious, which buys us time. Time for what Victoria looked at Harrison, who was barely conscious then at the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. Time to get out of here. Mitchell called his team together in the darkness of the besieged building. 6 men able to fight in varying degrees. 2 unable, and 1 woman who had proven herself to be something far more than anyone had imagined. They sat in a loose circle, weapons close at hand, ears tuned to the sounds of the enemy outside. Victoria Mitchell said, using her first name for the first time since the mission began. You have tactical control for planning purposes. I maintain command authority, but I want your assessment and recommendations. It was an unusual arrangement, but these were unusual circumstances. Victoria accepted the responsibility without hesitation. This was what she had trained for, what she had prepared for, even during the long months when she was forbidden from doing exactly this. We have 2 options. She began, her voice low but clear. First, we defend in place and try to hold until someone realizes we are missing and sends a rescue force. That could be 12 hours, could be 3 days. Harrison will not survive 3 days. Cole probably will not either. The rest of us would be combat ineffective from exhaustion and ammunition depletion within 24 hours. And the second option, Cross asked. We break out. Hit them before dawn during their lowest alert period when they are tired and their attention is scattered. We move fast, we move light, and we punch through their weakest sector. She paused. We carry our wounded and we run until we reach ground we can actually defend. Bennett shook his head. The wounded slow us down. I am not saying we leave them, he added quickly, just stating fact. They do slow us down, Victoria agreed, which is why we split into 2 elements. Breakout team of our 4 most combat-effective personnel punches through the perimeter and secures an exit corridor. Security team stays with the wounded and provides covering fire for our movement. Once the breakout team clears the immediate area, we loop back to extract the security team and the casualties. It was risky. It was desperate. It was also the only plan that did not end with all of them dying in this building. I will lead the breakout team, Mitchell said. Victoria shook her head. With respect, sir, I should lead it. I have the most recent training in close quarters battle, and I am the best shot in this room. You are needed here to coordinate both elements and make command decisions if things go wrong. The logic was sound, even if the implications made everyone uncomfortable. Mitchell had years of experience, but Victoria had skills specifically honed for exactly this kind of fighting. Who else on breakout, he asked, accepting her assessment. Cross, Thompson, and Rodriguez. Cross has the best marksmanship after me based on what I have observed. Thompson can move despite his arm wound, and Rodriguez has proven adaptable under pressure. She looked at the remaining men. Bennett, Cole, and Walsh stay with you and Harrison. Hold this building and cover our movement. When you hear us engage, that is your signal to prepare for extraction. When do we move? Cross asked. Victoria checked her watch. 0430 hours. 2 hours before dawn. We use the darkness to maximum advantage and hit them while they are at their lowest ebb. The next 3 hours were spent preparing. Victoria distributed the remaining ammunition, prioritizing the breakout team, but ensuring the security element had enough to sustain covering fire. She checked and rechecked everyone's medical condition, stabilized Harrison and Cole as much as possible, and made sure Walsh understood his role, despite the concussion that was still affecting his cognitive function. At 0400 hours, she gathered the breakout team for final coordination. In the darkness of the building, using a red lens flashlight that would not destroy their night vision, she sketched their route on a piece of cardboard torn from an ammunition box. We exit through the northwest corner where the wall partially collapsed during the fighting. It is the point they have guarded least because the rubble makes it look impassable. We make it passable. She traced the route with her finger. Rodriguez goes first, clears the immediate area. Thompson follows, secures left. I go third, secure right. Cross comes last and provides rear security. Once we are clear of the building, we move in diamond formation with me on point. Why you on point? Cross asked. It was not a challenge, just a question, because I have the best low-light vision and the fastest reflexes for close-range engagement. If we run into a sentry, I need to be the one who deals with it quietly. Cross nodded. He had seen her move, had watched her kill. He trusted her. At 0415 hours, they moved into position. Victoria led them to the northwest corner where two walls had partially collapsed from earlier fighting. The rubble was treacherous, a jumble of mud bricks and broken timbers and shattered stone, but she found a path through it, testing each foothold before committing her weight. At 0428 hours, she performed her final weapons check. Full magazine, round chambered, safety off, knife accessible, backup pistol secured. She looked at the three men who would follow her into darkness and probable death. Stay close. Stay quiet. When I engage, you engage. When I move, you move. We stopped for nothing until we reached the tree line. She paused. Questions? There were none. At 0430 hours precisely, Victoria Ashford climbed through the rubble and disappeared into the Afghan night. The enemy had grown complacent in the hours since the last assault. They had guards posted, yes, but the guards were tired and cold and convinced that the Americans were trapped. They watched the obvious exits, the breach they had created, the doors and windows that faced the compound. They did not watch the northwest corner where the rubble made any escape attempt seem impossible. Victoria moved through their positions like a ghost. She used every shadow, every depression in the ground, every fragment of cover that the terrain provided. Her footfalls made no sound on the rocky earth. Her breathing was controlled and silent. She was invisible, a predator moving through a herd of prey that did not know it was being hunted. Behind her, 3 Navy SEALs followed in her wake. These were men who prided themselves on their stealth, men who had spent thousands of hours learning to move without being seen or heard. They struggled to match her silent progress. 50 meters from the building, they encountered their first sentry. Victoria saw him before he saw her. A dark shape silhouetted against the slightly lighter eastern sky. He was facing away, watching the building, his rifle cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. She closed the distance in absolute silence. The knife came out of its sheath without a whisper of metal on leather. She was behind him before he knew anyone was there, her left hand clamping over his mouth while her right drove the blade between his ribs and into his heart. He died without making a sound louder than an exhaled breath. Victoria lowered his body to the ground and dragged it into a shadow where it would not be discovered. The entire engagement had taken less than 6 seconds. Cross watched this with professional appreciation. He had trained with the best operators in the world, had cross-trained with Delta Force and Special Forces, and a dozen other elite units. He had never seen anyone move quite like Victoria moved. They reached the compound wall. Victoria identified the guard tower, counted the men in it, calculated angles. She hand-signaled to cross 2 targets. Simultaneous engagement required. He nodded, understanding. On her mark, they fired together. The suppressed shots were barely louder than coughs in the darkness. Both guards dropped without a sound. 15 seconds later, they were over the wall and moving toward the tree line 200 meters distant. They were halfway to the trees when someone shouted behind them. The alarm had been raised. Maybe someone found the sentry Victoria had killed. Maybe a guard in a position they had not identified had seen their movement. It did not matter. What mattered was the automatic weapons fire that suddenly ripped through the darkness, high and poorly aimed, but increasing in volume by the second. Run, Victoria commanded, and they ran. Behind them, covering fire erupted from the building where Mitchell's team was executing their part of the plan. The SEALs in the security element engaged every target they could see, drawing the enemy's attention away from the fleeing breakout team. It worked. Most of the insurgent fire shifted back toward the building, giving Victoria's team the precious seconds they needed to reach the trees. They crashed into the vegetation and immediately went to ground weapons facing outward, scanning for pursuit. 30-second security halt, Victoria ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. Drink water, check ammunition. Prepare to move. They were breathing hard, but they were still combat effective. Victoria allowed herself to feel a moment of hope. They had made it this far. Now they just needed to circle back, extract the wounded, and the sound of helicopter rotors cut through the night. Victoria's head snapped up. A UH-60 Black Hawk was coming in low and fast from the east, its door gunners already engaging targets around the compound. Tracer fire streaked down from the aircraft, chewing up the positions where insurgents had been hiding. It was not the rescue they had expected, because they had not called for any rescue. But someone had noticed their absence, had tracked their last known position, and had sent a quick reaction force. All friendly elements, mark your position. A voice crackled over the emergency frequency. Victoria keyed her backup radio, the one she'd been carrying but assumed was too damaged to function. Breakout team 200 meters northwest of compound, in tree line. 4 personnel, combat effective. Mitchell's voice came through a moment later. Security element, northern building. 4 personnel, 2 critical wounded. Taking heavy fire. The helicopter made its decision instantly. It could not land in the compound under that volume of fire, but it could suppress the enemy positions long enough for the building's occupants to evacuate. The pilot's voice came through Victoria's headset, and she recognized it immediately. Chief Warrant Officer Rachel Brennan, an old friend from another lifetime. Victoria Ashford, can your element move to an alternate LZ? Affirm. Grid reference follows. Approximately 15 minutes at tactical pace. Roger that. We extract the building first, then come for you. Stay low, stay quiet, stay alive. Victoria watched through the trees as the Black Hawk circled the compound, its guns devastating the enemy positions with withering fire. Mitchell's team emerged from the building carrying Harrison and Cole on improvised litters. The helicopter descended just long enough for them to scramble aboard, then climbed steeply away, absorbing enemy fire into its armored hull. Move, Victoria told her team. They moved. 15 minutes later, they reached the alternate landing zone, a small clearing barely large enough for the helicopter. The Black Hawk came in hard, fin flared at the last second, and the team scrambled aboard. As the aircraft climbed away from the valley, Victoria looked down at the compound they had defended, at the building where she had rediscovered who she really was, at the bodies scattered across the ground. Rachel Brennan's voice came through her headset. Heard you picked up a rifle again. Circumstances required it, ma'am. I am sure they did. A pause. We will discuss it when we get back. Victoria leaned back against the helicopter's hull and closed her eyes. Whatever consequences came next, she would face them. But right now, in this moment, 8 men were alive who should have been dead. That was worth any price. 3 days after the mission, Victoria stood in Colonel David Freeman's office at Bagram Air Base. She was wearing her dress uniform pressed and perfect, her blonde hair pulled back in the severe bun that had become her disguise over the past 2 years. She expected court-martial, discharge, prison. She had violated the terms of her reassignment in the most spectacular way possible, and the military did not forgive such transgressions easily. Freeman sat behind his desk, a stack of reports in front of him. He had aged since she last saw him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. I have read every report, he said, without preamble. The team leader's assessment, the individual statements, the tactical analysis from intelligence. He paused. I have also had conversations with some people who have strong opinions about what you did. Victoria said nothing. There was nothing to say. You violated your reassignment. You engaged in combat operations. You made command decisions. You led tactical movements. Freeman's voice was flat, emotionless. All things you were explicitly prohibited from doing. Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Victoria met his eyes. No, sir. My actions speak for themselves. If the consequence is separation from service, I accept that. But I will not say I was wrong. Freeman was silent for a long moment. Then he slid a folder across the desk. Naval Special Warfare Command has submitted a request for your permanent attachment to SEAL Team Operations. They want you for a new program they are establishing. Combat medics with tactical authority who can serve dual roles when circumstances require. Victoria's heart stopped. You are recommending approval with conditions, additional training, clear protocols, and understanding of when to follow orders. Freeman paused. And when to break them. He stood and offered his hand. Do not make me regret this, Victoria. She shook it firmly. I will not, sir. 6 months later, Washington, D.C., a military awards ceremony. Victoria Ashford walked into the ballroom and the SEALs who had once ignored her stopped breathing. She was transformed. Her blonde hair cascaded loose over her shoulders, freed from the severe bun. The red dress hugged every curve, elegant and striking a far cry from the shapeless medical scrubs. She walked with confidence, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her blue eyes meeting every gaze without flinching. She was stunning, and everyone in that room knew what she was capable of. Chief Cross approached first. Staff Sergeant Ashford, you clean up well. Victoria smiled warmly. So do you, Chief. Mitchell appeared with the ceremony program. Her name was listed Bronze Star with Valor. You earned this, he said quietly. We earned it. I just stopped following orders at the right moment. Bennett extended his hand, the finger she had splinted fully healed. I never apologized. For what I said on the helicopter. Victoria took his hand. You did not know. Nobody did. She glanced at her reflection in a nearby window. The red dress, the loose blonde hair, the metal gleaming on her chest. Sometimes, she said softly, the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. The ceremony began. Victoria took her place among the heroes. She had never been just a nurse. She had always been a warrior, and now finally the world knew it. And that, my friends, is the story of Victoria Ashford, the nurse who picked up a rifle and turned the tide of battle. The warrior who was forced to hide behind bandages and bedside manner until the moment when hiding was no longer an option. 8 Navy SEALs walked into that valley expecting to carry her. She ended up carrying them. It makes you think, does it not? How many people do we pass every single day without really seeing them? The quiet coworker in the corner office, the unassuming neighbor who keeps to herself, the person sitting next to you on the subway right now. What battles have they fought that we know nothing about? What skills are they hiding because the world told them to be small? Victoria spent 2 years being invisible because someone decided she was too dangerous to be seen. But when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, she stepped out of the shadows and became exactly who she was always meant to be. Here is my question for you. Have you ever had to hide who you really are? Have you ever been told that you were too much, too aggressive, too ambitious, too anything? And if so, what would it take for you to finally step into your full power? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one and I would love to hear your story. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the invisible people in your own life, do me a favor. Smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that tales of courage and redemption and people who refuse to stay small deserve to be heard. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. I have got more incredible tales coming your way. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the world counted them out. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has been told they are too much. Someone who is hiding their true self because it is easier than fighting. Tell them what Victoria Ashford proved in that bullet-riddled building in Afghanistan. Sometimes the wolf has to wear sheep's clothing, but when the pack is threatened, the wolf always remembers who she really is. Until next time, stay dangerous, my friends, and never let anyone tell you to be less than you are.